Welcome to the Compost Pile, a podcast where we break down gardening, homesteading, and more. Join your hosts, David Poole and Aaron Barnhill, as they pile up information and break it down so that you can be more successful in the garden. Hey guys, welcome back to the Compost Pile, your source for all things gardening and homesteading. Today I'm here in our home garden doing a solo episode, and I wanted to talk about what if we're starting a garden from scratch here in Zone 9A? What if I came out here today and everything was gone, the beds were empty, maybe there weren't even any beds, the soil wasn't ready, it wasn't prepped. We were starting from scratch. So how do we go about being successful from point A? So we're going to cover a few things about what I would do, and more importantly, what I wouldn't do. When we started this channel, or this idea in general, there's gardening advice everywhere. You can find it in books, on the web, here on YouTube, on a podcast, really anywhere. But a lot of that advice isn't practical for this small little microclimate in which we have here in Southeast Texas. So this episode is really dialing in for those of us that are in Southeast Texas, but it may give you guys outside of this area some insight on things to think about if you are starting fresh in your area this spring season. First thing that I would really dive into if I was starting fresh is soil. Soil is everything when it comes to growing. It's everything when it comes to plant life, and it's where we should start, and it's where we should put our investment into. So here's the truth about Southeast Texas soil. It's very heavy in clay, and that means that with the type of weather, the amount of rainfall we see in a season, we're most likely going to see some form of compaction. And it's honestly why we see so many people moving to raised bed gardening, because of natural compaction within the soil that is here in our lawns and old traditional row gardens. If it's compacted, it also does not allow for water to really infiltrate deeply, which doesn't allow for deep root growth. And then when it does dry out, if it dries out completely, it's like a brick. It begins to crack, which makes it harder for plants to be able to grab nutrients, makes it harder for water to actually retain in the soil for long periods of time. This cycle alone of soil issues is one of the main frustrations that people face when they're starting a garden. And to me, it's one of the reasons why most people fail and stop gardening very early on. They're so focused on getting nice looking plants and all the fancy things, but they're putting the least amount of investment and focus on the most important part, and that's the soil. If our soil's not right, it's also going to stay saturated for really long periods of time. And while water is good, too much water actually suffocates roots. It makes plant growth stall. It can also cause nutrients to wash out more rapidly, leading to yellow leaves and leaving us to have to add more nutrients back into the soil. And then we turn to just fertilizing, and it doesn't solve the problem. It's not remineralizing our soil. It's not adding organic matter back into the soil. And if we ignore compaction, we're also ignoring the fact that plants don't just need to drink. They need to breathe. Those root systems need oxygen in order to be healthy. The microbes inside the soil also need that oxygen. So if I was just starting out, if I'm starting out in the ground, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to test my soil. I'm going to test for pH and macronutrients to see where I'm starting. I'm also just going to check the consistency of the soil. I'm going to dig around, put my hands in the dirt, see if it holds or clumps together very easily, or does it fall apart too loosely and doesn't hold enough. So to give us some ideas of how we can change that, whether we need to add drainage amendments, whether we need to add more organic matter to hold moisture. If we're starting out with raised beds, and they're empty, we have a structure, we need to make sure we're starting out with a quality soil, something that is going to alleviate these potential compaction issues and water issues, and making sure that the plants can breathe, the roots can breathe, and nutrients easily flow through the soil. Another thing that you don't want to do is just randomly throw a bunch of fertilizer into the soil. Because if you don't know where you started, if you don't do that soil test, we might be adding things that we don't need or there's already an abundance of. When we have too much of one thing in the soil, oftentimes it can bind up other nutrients that your plants might need. So it's really important to make sure that we have an idea of where we start. Now that we've gotten soil out of the way, I really want to talk about what you should plant. You know, there's the idea of just planting so many different things, or that you're going to be able to produce all this food. But if we don't start off with something that is going to lead to success, we're going to get deterred. We're going to be frustrated. And again, just like with crummy soil, we're going to not stick with it. And we're going to have wasted all this time and energy, money. So I think you should be really selective about what crops you're putting in, and pick something that's going to succeed in the humidity and the heat and the stressful spring season where it's windy. Oftentimes it's super wet. So I'm going to pick a few crops that I would recommend for you today that are pretty easy and that you can be successful with. Number one, a little bit down the road from spring, but okra. Okra loves heat. It can handle the drought. It can handle the full unrealistic hot sun of Southeast Texas. And if you start off with good soil, it's easy to get a good crop with. Southern peas, such as black eyes, purple hulls, crowders, cream peas, all those are excellent choices. Just like your okra, they're pretty carefree. You're going to plant them. Peas are nitrogen affixers, so they're going to produce their own fertilizer. They don't like a lot of inputs as far as nitrogen goes from us as the gardener. They can withstand the heat, they can withstand the humidity, and typically they're fairly pest-free overall. Bush beans is another great option. They produce quickly, not a lot of issues, very easy to turn and get a successful harvest with enough to actually do something with in the kitchen. Peppers are simple. They'll grow from spring, oftentimes season after season, depending on the winters and whether we get a cold freeze or an early frost. But if you protect them, you can have reliable production spring and fall, and maybe again next year spring and fall with that same exact plant. Now, we know everybody wants to plant tomatoes, and we encourage you to, but if you're new to gardening, an easy way to be successful with tomatoes in your first season is to choose your smaller tomatoes. Maybe some of your paste tomatoes, your cherry tomatoes, grape tomatoes. They tend to have a higher humidity and heat resistance, and they'll actually produce a little bit longer into the season than others. Video we just dropped a couple days ago about the Rapunzel. It's one we trialed last year in the cherry tomato family, and my goodness, I don't even know what we could have done with all those. We had so many. We had them spring and fall. Something else that'll complement a lot of your other plants in the garden that's also going to be really great for pollinators is basil. Not specifically Italian large leaf basil, but some of basils like African blue, cinnamon basil, lemon basil, Thai basil, some of those have a great flavor to them, and they'll flower consistently without affecting the flavor of the actual the leaves of the basil. And those flowers are going to bring in a wide array of pollinators consistently. Basil is one that we always have, and most of the time we end up with more than one in the garden, located different kinds spread out because of those pollinator benefits. Dill is another one in the herb family that seems to be very easy. We're going on behind us here. This is the same dill plant from a year ago. It's still going strong. It's died back in the cold, and it's resprouting, and it's provided us with lots of produce, a lot of dried herb, and then also it's been really beneficial for swallowtail butterfly caterpillars. Now, here's some things I would avoid early on that if you don't have the timing just right, and sometimes even if you do, they can be difficult. If you're just starting out and it's early enough in the spring, I would avoid things like cauliflower, lettuce, maybe large slicing tomatoes if you're new to gardening. If you don't have your timing right, they're going to be very susceptible to pests and issues as the heat sets in. And if you're not ready for those or prepared and know what's coming, it makes your job a lot more difficult. You also don't want to plant everything all in one weekend if you can avoid it. I know that's difficult sometimes. I know this myself. But if we plant everything all in one weekend, then we tend to have all of our production at the same exact time for most of our crops. And that creates a lot of excess work trying to figure out what to do with them, whether we need to dry herbs, process tomatoes, do canning, or just get rid of the excess before it goes bad so we don't waste everything we just grew. So planting in stages, succession planting, that way you get a little bit along the way, and as some plants fade out, others are still producing, so you're getting an even supply over a period of time. You also want to avoid planting too early. So in February, we had a really warm season there, and people jump the gun on certain items. We often see people, they're ready at the end of February, they want eggplants and cucumbers going in the ground. And while they're fairly simplistic plants, if your timing is not right on those, then you're gonna replant them over and over again. I can't tell you how many times people come and buy cucumber plants over and over, trying to get them in early. And often if they do survive that early planting, you could plant seeds later on and they'll actually surpass those ones that went through the stressful period when it's too cool for them to be in the ground. So get a planting guide from your local feed store or garden center, so that way you have some kind of frame of reference to go off of. So depending on your knowledge level, just because you plant early doesn't mean that you're going to harvest earlier than those who plant later. So being mindful, ask for advice, learn from other people, and more importantly, keep a journal. Write things down so you know what works and what doesn't. You've got to be prepared and you've got to make a plan. So documenting things is really important, because when spring is here, it doesn't gradually come on. It just kind of happens. It's go time. And if you don't get things in a timely manner, then you're going to miss your opportunity, and then you're going to lead yourself to a bunch of problems. And we'll kind of dive into a few of those really quickly. So if we're not preparing for the heat that comes in July and moves into August, when most of our spring garden is trickling out, and we plant late, then we're going to be susceptible to far more pest issues. A good example, tomatoes, the leaf-footed stink bug, they come on when it gets hot. So early timing and early planting and protection, keeping the plants warm, allows us to get our production before the pest pressure really sets in. As it warms up and we get into those hot months like July, the humidity also goes up. And with high humidity comes more disease pressure. Diseases like blight on peppers, tomatoes become more prevalent because the moisture content is higher up under the leaves. And oftentimes, depending on how our garden is set up, we might not have good enough airflow to keep those leaves kind of dry and less susceptible to disease spreading around. If we wait too late to plant some things, we can get blossom drop. It's where the temperature becomes too warm to actually set fruit on the plant. So we've got a beautiful looking plant, tons of flowers, but no production. And that's all elemental. We can't control that unless we time our planting just right. As we move into that hotter time too, if we're not prepared, the soil temperature is going to rise rapidly. It's going to get really warm, and then the demand for water is going to double. July into August, anything left in the garden is going to need twice as much water as it might have needed before. So having good watering practices, being prepared to water deeply, making sure the soil stays with moisture deep down, not just in those couple inches, is going to become incredibly important. And because of this, if I was starting from scratch or rebuilding my garden, an absolute non-negotiable thing for me is irrigation. Drip irrigation is inexpensive. It's a little cumbersome to set up, but with a good plan, you can save yourself a lot of water, a lot of hassle, and have far better looking plants when we get into the hot season, because moisture is going to be more readily available at the right amount. If you're like me, this garden here, I thought I'll just deal with the irrigation later. Here we are 4 seasons in this particular spot, and I still wish every year I'd find time to get irrigation. It's difficult because inconsistent moisture leads to stress in plants, and just because we come out and water each time doesn't mean we do it the same. So that irrigation helps us rule out some of those variables. But if we do have to water and irrigation isn't an option, I would encourage you not to water overhead, as this promotes fungal issues. Water is needed at the root level so it can be absorbed in. I also encourage you to water deeply. Shallow watering produces shallow roots for plants because they learn that the moisture and the resources they need are in that top layer of soil. But if we water deeply, those roots are going to reach down farther, and we're going to have a healthier plant that has more access to moisture as it goes downward, because water does move down. It's heavy, especially in a raised bed. It's going to seep towards the bottom with gravity. So it's going to help our plants have better access to water evenly and nutrients. We also need to make sure we pay attention to the top layer of soil. Just because it's dry doesn't mean that the roots down below are in dry soil. The top layer of soil is going to dry out faster, and that often leads people to overwatering. Stick your hand in the dirt, see if there's moisture down low, and it will help you dial in your watering for your specific setting. Starting over, I'd rule out all the technicalities of fertility. We don't need to get crazy, in depth with all these specifics for tomatoes and for other plants. Using a well-balanced, slow-release organic fertilizer, and then using a liquid fertilizer to help provide extra nutrients as plants are growing and as they need it, will make things much simpler for you, and it will lead to a better ecosystem in your soil, better microbial life, and better plant growth and health, as well as production. There's not a lot we can do about pests. You're gonna get them. It's part of it. Certain things like stink bugs, armyworms, caterpillars, aphids, they happen. We don't want to jump to just spraying. It's one thing that I always recommend as I see new people coming in, focus on the soil first, which leads to a healthier plant, which leads to a lot of pest issues like aphids being able to be resolved by the plant itself. It's not susceptible or is an easy target to these pests. Some things, like worms and caterpillars, a lot of them turn into beneficial pollinators, so be mindful about what you're removing or jumping to killing. Healthy soil and consistent watering is going to reduce the severity of a lot of issues because the plant is going to be healthier. Spending time out in the garden is really important. It gives you the ability to observe and monitor what's happening, because not every pest issue is this world-ending issue for the garden. Most are very simple and don't really need a lot of input or care from you. So as we're getting close to wrapping up this episode, let's talk a little bit about money. If we were starting brand new and let's say I had $500 to start a garden, maybe even if I had 250, it doesn't matter. The point that I want to make is that you want to put most of that investment into soil and amendments, compost, good quality organic fertilizer. Treat the soil as the number one thing when you're starting out or starting over, and you will be more successful. Second, I would invest in irrigation early if I have the ability to do drip irrigation. It makes care and maintenance so much easier. Next, mulch, making sure that I'm keeping the garden weed free, retaining that moisture, and also regulating the soil temperature, especially as we move into the summer. The thing I'm going to spend the least amount of money on is plants, seeds, and I'm not even going to buy tools unless I absolutely need them. I got hands that can dig in the dirt and get dirty, so spend less money on good-looking plants. Put your investment into the soil and you will see a difference. No matter how you start off or what you start off with, one thing that I always like to remind people is year 2 is always better than year 1. Soil's a living thing. It gets better over time. So it's gonna be better next season. So even if you did mediocre in season 1, or maybe you think you did really good, wait for season 2. And if you keep up with the same mentality of being a steward of the soil first, then you will continue to grow better and better each season. Our goal when we're starting over or starting fresh is building a working system that supports the living soil and our goals as a gardener and growing the produce we want. Southeast Texas doesn't reward wishful thinkers and wishful gardeners. It rewards the ones who take the time to think about what they're doing, plan, learn, and grow. It rewards preparation. And at the end of the day, preparation is completely up to you. So you hold the success in your hands. I really hope that you have an awesome spring season. We've got things planted out here. We did a couple of days worth of planning. We don't have everything yet, and I'm really excited to see how things go and making the changes in which I've learned over the past 2 years in this exact garden and sharing that with you. So let us know what you're growing this spring, maybe what you're starting with if you're brand new. And if you have questions, let us know. We'd appreciate it if you take an opportunity to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And we'll catch you here on the Compost Pile next time. Thanks for watching.